Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you might be located. My name is Matthew Lee, and I'm the Director of Empirical Research at the Human Flourishing Program. Our program is based in the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University. Founded in 2016, the Human Flourishing Program aims to study and promote human flourishing and to develop systematic approaches to the synthesis of knowledge across disciplines. We really care about connecting the deep wisdom of the humanities with the rigorous empirical methods of the social sciences. I would like to welcome you to our public webinar on the economics of well-being and global human flourishing. This webinar is hosted by our program's Flourishing Network, which I established over 3 years ago as a small community of practice. And since then, we've hosted over 250 regular members and occasional guests. We convene regular online discussions of best practices and different approaches to assessing and promoting flourishing in a wide variety of settings. The Flourishing Network connects people around the world interested in flourishing research and practice with one another and provides opportunities to engage with and utilize the flourishing framework and research of the Human Flourishing Program and to develop collaborations on the topic of flourishing. More information is available on our program website, and I will attempt to drop this into the chat box. So Pat, that only appears to go to the host and panelists. I don't know if there's a way to make that more
so in the
available.
To section, I believe if you click on where it says hosts and panelists, you should be able to select everyone from the drop-down bar that pops up.
Oh, okay, I see it. Everyone, there it is. Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, there's the link. And feel free to reach out to me if this is your first time joining one of our network events and you would like to become involved in the work of the network, attend our monthly Zoom meetings, or get involved in one of our working groups. Please feel free to reach out to me at this email address, which I've just shared. And just so that you'll have it, if you have questions about this specific event, I'm putting into the chat box Noémie's email address. Noémie is the one who organized this and brought together the wonderful speakers. So feel free to reach out to her with any questions about the event or the working group that she is leading on the economics of well-being and global flourishing. I wanted to say just a few brief remarks about our Flourishing Network. We have been really focused on this motto, which has been used by a few groups, including a college at University of California, Santa Cruz, the pursuit of truth in the company of friends. And we aim to better understand empirically and through the humanities the deeper truths of flourishing, but also to manifest these deeper truths in our own lives. And so we believe that while we try to assess and promote flourishing, it's most beneficial if we flourish ourselves in the context of supportive relationships and even friendships. So that has been the aim of our Flourishing Network from the very beginning, is to develop these kinds of friendships as we pursue these deeper truths together. And I'm delighted that so many people have joined us, including senior fellows who have led various monthly meetings and working groups. We have some events coming up that I would like to announce. Christina Hinton, one of our co-leaders of the network, has organized a public event on August 31st at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, titled Promoting Flourishing in Schools. And we've always had a very strong focus on education within the network. Another co-leader of the network, John Beal, will be leading group flow exercises this fall as we start to offer a variety of activities, including conventional presentations of research findings and discussions of interventions, but also to engage in group flow exercises under John's leadership and do some other networking kinds of events this fall. So stay tuned to our website for more updates on that. And our senior fellows and other working group chairs will continue to organize monthly meetings as well. And periodically, we will do these public webinars to invite a broader audience. So with those few remarks just as background, again, if you're joining late, I would like to welcome you to our Flourishing Network and invite you to get involved in any of our activities and reach out to me at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program for more information about that. I think it's time now to introduce Noémie, who's really been the leader of this particular event. And our Flourishing Network aims to empower all members to lead their own initiatives, and we support that in various ways. It's really helpful for us to think about the network as a network of leaders. And each of us has our own expertise and our own sort of focus. And together, the network is stronger when we are all able to offer events like this and to start new working groups on topics related to flourishing. So I'm delighted to have gotten to know Noémie over the past couple of years now. And she serves as one of our senior fellows. And from the earliest conversations, we've talked about how we can promote regenerative spaces within the network and more broadly throughout the world. And I've just been so appreciative of the way that she has wanted to connect the work, excuse me, the work of the network to the global economics of well-being and flourishing. And this is a topic that comes up a lot now in our network. As many commentators have noted, there's, we are all globally interconnected, and there's sort of a globalization of indifference, it seems at times, in how our economic systems are functioning throughout the world. And so what would the tools of human flourishing and well-being more generally offer to our understanding of economics and how we might make transformational changes? And many of the speakers today are deeply involved in this work of transformational change, or helping us to understand what's happening globally and what the opportunities might be. So I'm really delighted to introduce Noémie, and she can say a few words about her background and affiliations, but I'll speak more from a personal standpoint, that I've really appreciated the pursuit of these truths with her in the spirit of virtuous friendship, and all of the efforts that she's been involved with to help our Flourishing Network become more regenerative. And so with that, Noémie, please introduce yourself a bit and tell us a little bit more about what we have planned for this event today.
Thank you so much, Matt. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Welcome, everyone. I know we have some more people who joined in. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. And today's a really, really exciting day. I have the honor of being one of the senior fellows for the Flourishing Network at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program. And one of the greatest gifts has been to really connect with this global community of change agents who are looking at bridging the gaps between practice, research, and policy. And the economics of well-being was really an idea that was envisioned to look at how we can tackle systems level changes to promote the landscape and the ecosystems for humans to flourish around the world. And so today's session is really the beginning of many, many dialogues that we'll be having. It's the inaugural symposium for the economics of well-being and global human flourishing. And we also have a working group on this topic that I started about a year ago, thanks to the support of Matt and Tyler for helping us to create this space. And so Matt, I'm really grateful to you for holding that space with me, for us to constantly talk about how we can embody regenerative space for the people around us and the people we serve in our network and beyond. And so as a senior fellow, it's my pleasure to bring together all of these amazing leaders across industries, across fields of practice, from academia and research to leading global organizations on analytics. This is a real great opportunity to hear a diverse array of perspectives. And so without further ado, I'm actually going to hand it off in just a moment to Tyler, but I wanted to frame a little bit of context of why we're here. So fundamentally, economics is the study of what we value. What do we value in life? And what we measure matters. And so looking at the metrics and the rigor with which we bring to measuring not only GDP and other standard metrics of economics, but also human flourishing. So really redefining and placing human well-being, flourishing, sustainability at the center of our dialogue is really reinforced and supported by looking at the measurement that we are integrating as nations, as organizations, as communities, in education. And so you'll hear from a couple of different leaders in this space looking at global human flourishing, the Global Flourishing study. We're going to hear about the work that Gallup is doing around human flourishing in the workplace. Albina with the World Economic Forum, looking at how to empower young leaders in the space of flourishing from an economic perspective, but also from a community perspective. And we'll also hear from Alana and Levy about the state of women in the world and how they flourish and all of the different aspects in relationship to our nations and those metrics. So a sneak peek, we're going to hear about 15 to 20 minutes from each speaker. We'll have a little bit of dialogue, and then we will integrate that with a little bit of contemplative reflection in closing. So Matt, I'm going to hand it back over to you to introduce the one and only Tyler VanderWeele. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Noémie. Yes, thank you. And I know I'm getting emails and seeing things in the chat about folks wanting to join. There is no direct Zoom link. You register through the website and then a Zoom link is generated automatically. So I've placed that link in the chat box. And I should also note that we are recording. So anyone who had technical difficulties, you have a colleague who couldn't join in for whatever reason, the video will be posted here. And I've just added the website for this event. And so we will post the video once it's been edited and compressed on this website, and anyone can view it at any time. So thank you again, Noémie, for that overview, and I'm very excited to hear the speakers. So without further ado, we will hear from Tyler, our first speaker. And let me just introduce Tyler briefly. Tyler VanderWeele is the John L. Loeb and Francis Lehman Loeb Professor of Epidemiology in the Departments of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and Director of the Human Flourishing Program and co-director of the Initiative on Health, Religion, and Spirituality at Harvard University. He holds degrees from the University of Oxford, University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard University in mathematics, philosophy, theology, finance, and biostatistics. Again, reflecting the program's interest in connecting the deep wisdom of the humanities with the rigorous methods of empirical social science. His methodological research is focused on theory and methods for distinguishing between association and causation in the biomedical and social sciences, and more recently on psychosocial measurement theory. He's published over 400 papers in peer-reviewed journals and is the author of the books Explanation and Causal Inference, Modern Epidemiology, and Measuring Wellbeing. He also writes a monthly blog posting on topics related to human flourishing, and I'll put that in the chat box in a moment so that you'll have that link. So without Tyler's support and more generally vision for the Human Flourishing Program, this flourishing network would not exist. So I'm very grateful to Tyler for all of the opportunities that he has opened for all of us within the network. And it's a great joy to introduce him so that he can share a little bit of his perspective and the research that he's been conducting. So welcome, Tyler.
Well, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you and Noémie for organizing this symposium. Truly delighted to be here. In the time that I have, I'll offer a few brief remarks on flourishing and the Human Flourishing Program. I'll then spend most of my time discussing this new research study, the Global Flourishing Study, which will be an open access resource available to anyone who wants to make use of it, but which we hope dramatically expands our knowledge of the distribution and determinants of flourishing. We hope also, as I will remark, that it might shape policy, that it might help focus economic policy towards the end of flourishing. As Matt had mentioned, the twofold aim of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard is to study and promote human flourishing and to develop and implement systematic approaches, synthesis of knowledge across disciplines. So some of our aims are academic. A lot of what we do is research and then reflection on how the disciplines relate to one another. But you'll see clearly embedded in that first aim is also the promotion of flourishing. And while we try to do this in a variety of ways, one of the principal ways, I think, in which the Human Flourishing Program has contributed has been the creation of this flourishing network. So I am deeply grateful to Matt for founding the Flourishing Network and to the other leaders, Christina Hinton, to John Beal, to Noémie for organizing this event, and to the many who are leading various working groups and who are working to promote well-being in practice. Truly delighted that so many people have come together with this common aim. So in the time that I have, I'll spend most of it describing this global flourishing study. This has been now about 3.5 years in the making, and we hope to have data collected by the end of this calendar year. But this study is a collaboration between Harvard University, Baylor University, Gallup, and the Center for Open Science. The study will involve 240,000 individuals in 22 countries, representing about half of the world's population. Thanks to Gallup's wonderful research infrastructure and survey infrastructure, we will be doing nationally representative sampling within each country, and we'll be collecting individual level longitudinal panel data. So we'll be looking at the same group of 240,000 individuals annually, every year, over the course of 5 years. So this is a massive expansion of Gallup's data collection infrastructure. While we've been doing World Poll for 15 plus years, the only place where they have longitudinal panel data collection on the same group of individuals rather than a separate sample each year is the United States. So now this will be expanding. Gallup's infrastructure will be expanding to these 22 other countries. So this will be an extraordinary resource to try to understand the determinants of well-being. It will involve a rich set of questions on well-being, along with various social, psychological, economic, political, religious, spiritual, behavioral determinants. We are very grateful for funding from a consortium of 8 different funders, principally the Templeton Philanthropies, and I'll go through a complete set of acknowledgements at the end, but this really would not have been possible without the support of so many. And Byron Johnson at Baylor and I will be leading This study data collection is now underway, and we hope to have the first wave of data complete by the end of this calendar year, with the data available likely sometime in the first quarter of 2023. This will be an open access data resource. So this data will be available to anyone who wants to make use of it through the Center for Open Science. We hope it dramatically empowers research on flourishing and an understanding of what flourishing looks like globally. And so here you'll see the 22 countries represented in the Global Flourishing study across 6 different continents. This has not been without challenges. China was originally going to be part of the Global Flourishing study, and I think in part owing to the COVID-19 pandemic, began restricting data collection by or for foreign entities. Russia and Ukraine were originally part of this study as well. Geopolitics, once again, created challenges. We hope still to include Russia. Data collection in Ukraine at present simply is not possible. We hope to add it in due course. But these are the 22 countries that will be represented, again, constituting about half of the world's population, and within each country, nationally representative sampling. So more information on this Global Flourishing study is available elsewhere, but I'll kind of give a brief overview of some of what we're hoping to do with this study and with this data. Included within the study, we are assessing our own program's flourishing assessment, our flourishing index, as I'll speak about shortly. We are not restricting the study of well-being to these questions. We're asking a much richer set of well-being questions, but in part because we have used this flourishing index in so many different settings: educational, clinical, workplace, cohort studies. We will be collecting this data here as well, so as to be able to compare and do benchmarking with regard to across these various domains of flourishing. How are people doing in these various countries? So the flourishing index consists of 2 questions in each of 5 domains: happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and close social relationships. Not that these things exhaust flourishing, but each is arguably a part of it. I think each of these 5 domains satisfies the following 2 criteria. Each is nearly universally desired, and we have some empirical data on this as well. And each is an end in of itself. It's sought for its own sake and not merely as a means to some other end. But we certainly acknowledge that the means are also important. So we supplement the 10 questions across these 5 domains with 2 others on financial and material stability as important means to sustain these other ends. Here are the 10 questions that form the core of the flourishing index, chosen from questions that are widely used in the well-being literature, that have received some degree of empirical validation. So in the first domain, happiness and life satisfaction, how satisfied are you with life as a whole these days? 0 completely dissatisfied, 10 completely satisfied. This is perhaps the most widely used well-being question, used by the UK's annual survey, by the OECD. It's been used by Gallup. It'll be this year's national health interview study in the United States as well. And then we supplement that with something more effective. In general, how happy or unhappy do you usually feel? Second domain, physical and mental health. In general, how would you rate your physical health? 0 to 10, how would you rate your overall mental health? Standard self-rated health questions, use the US General Social Survey by the World Health Organization. Third domain, meaning and purpose. Overall, to what extent do you feel the things you do in your life are worthwhile? Once again, rated 0 to 10. Once again, a very widely used well-being question by the OECD and the UK's annual survey and many cohort studies as well. But then we supplement that with something more cognitive. I understand my purpose in life. 0, completely disagree. 10, completely agree. 2 questions on character. I always act to promote good in all circumstances, even in difficult and challenging situations. 0, not at all true of me. 10, completely true of me. I'm always able to give up some happiness now for a greater happiness later. And then the final domain, close social relationships. These two questions were drawn from the UK's campaign to end loneliness survey of short social connectedness and loneliness assessments. I'm content with my friendships and relationships, intended to capture in some sense the quantity, those relationships, and my relationships are as satisfying as I would like them to be, tending to assess the quality of those relationships. So this will be an important part of the Global Flourishing study, but we're not ending there. We're supplementing these 10 questions on well-being with various other questions on happiness, on life evaluation with Cantrell's ladder, widely used by Gallup and others, by questions on optimism, on freedom, on peace and balance and harmony, which has perhaps been neglected in the West, but which our work and our collaboration with the Global Wellbeing Initiative has suggested is given greater emphasis in the East, in which we perhaps need to incorporate into our own work. But other questions on mastery, on meaning and purpose, and then a host of questions on health and health behaviors, on financial and economic employment conditions, on religion and spirituality, on relationships and community, on politics, on character, trying to understand how is well-being distributed, and what are the drivers of well-being? What might be the important lever points to increase well-being, to increase flourishing globally? So we hope over time, as the data accumulates year after year, we'll be able to address questions like, what are the key determinants of human flourishing? What are the effects of personality or religion or childhood experiences, family life, community, work, politics, economics, or character on human flourishing? And how do these vary by country and by context? What is universal and what is culturally specific? By having this rich data set across these countries, across 6 continents, and having nationally representative samples, we'll be able to address over time these various questions. So again, this will be an open access data resource. We have also organized a core research team trying to look at each of these various constructs to understand how they're distributed, to understand what childhood experiences shape them, to understand how the present context affects well-being and how the various aspects of well-being go on to affect other outcomes. So in year 1, we hope to provide a description of the world, of these 22 countries with respect to well-being. How is hope distributed? What about forgiveness? What about happiness? What about a sense of balance or peace or freedom? And then how does this vary by age, by gender, by religious affiliation, by employment status? How is well-being distributed? And also, what childhood experiences shape these different aspects of well-being? And then in subsequent years, through various sophisticated methodologies, we'll try to understand the causes, the determinants of these different aspects of well-being and the effects of well-being on other outcomes, along with the various mechanisms. So just as a simple example, part of the intended year 1 output of this study is for each of these different constructs, whether again, that be hope or employment, or having adequate housing, or having a sense of meaning and purpose. How do childhood experiences shape these things? Year of birth, gender, race, ethnicity, religious affiliation, parents' marital status, relationship with father and mother, experiencing love from father and mother, feeling like an outsider, abuse. We're looking at negative as well as positive experiences, religious service attendance, one's health as a child, and the financial status of one's family. How do these things shape subsequently various aspects of well-being? We hope also that this data collection effort might begin to shift policy discussion and focus. As a simple and somewhat troubling example, for the first time in the United States, this January of 2022, we've seen that the age gradients of each of these various domains of flourishing is strictly increasing with age. Historically, well-being had, with age, the pattern had been more U-shaped, with younger people and older people doing better, and those in middle life perhaps struggling with young children and with aging parents not doing as well. What we've seen over the years is that left part of the U has been flattening. Young people are not doing as well as they used to be. And again, each of those 5 domains of well-being seem to be increasing strictly with age. This is a crisis for youth in the United States. Will we find similar patterns in other countries, or do dynamics differ? We hope within a year's time to be able to address such questions and to understand better what might be done to help young people these days. So this study will focus on research, but I think it will be of use to media, to policymakers, and to others. Again, I think while this knowledge is of interest for its own sake, the ultimate hope is that this knowledge would help promote human flourishing. And certainly, I think the central aim of the Flourishing Network is that promotion of flourishing. And I think this can be done in a variety of ways. I think there are a number of institutions critical for the promotion of flourishing: educational institutions, the workplace, family, religious communities. And I've written on the kind of empirical evidence how each of these different institutions is common in practice and has powerful effects across the flourishing domains. But there are also individual activities that I think can be promoted widely to enhance flourishing, regardless of the setting and context. Gratitude exercises, imagining one's best possible self, savoring activities, acts of kindness, volunteering, using character strengths. There's large literature from randomized trials in psychology that each of these things, can help affect various aspects of flourishing, happiness, sense of connection, mental health in some cases. We've tried to collect many of these into a literature review and a little flourishing app, but I think if these activities were distributed in a variety of settings, workplaces, schools, families, just communities elsewhere, flourishing would increase. But then I think there are also, in addition to these universal activities for flourishing, a number of important targeted practices and policies to enhance flourishing. And my vision, in some sense, of this Flourishing Network is trying to understand across these various other contexts, how do we promote flourishing? What practices are most helpful? What policies are most helpful in clinical care, in schools and universities, in workplaces, arts organizations, within cities, within families, amongst leaders, long-term care facilities, within economies, within religious communities? How might the various activities and policies be specifically shaped and tailored to promote well-being, to promote flourishing? So once again, I'm very grateful to Matt and to many others who are trying to carry this work out well, to translate our knowledge into activities, into policies to promote flourishing. I do want to acknowledge the generous support of many funders of the Global Flourishing Study: John Templeton Foundation, Templeton Religion Trust, Templeton World Charity Foundation, the Fetzer Institute, Paul Foster Family Foundation, Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation, Wellbeing Trust, and the David and Carol Myers Foundation. Again, this work would not be possible without their support. My collaborator and the joint principal investigator of the grant, Byron Johnson at Baylor, has of course been critical in getting this launched. It has been a wonderful relationship and collaboration, along with the research teams at Harvard, at Baylor, at Gallup, the Center for Open Science. And of course, none of this would be possible without Gallup's support, without Gallup's extraordinary data collection infrastructure and our partners there. So really delighted to be a part of the symposium today with Gallup CEO, John Clifton, and very much hope that this Global Flourishing Study will generate knowledge concerning the distribution and determinants of flourishing, will help empower policies and activities to promote flourishing, and might be of use to many of you at this symposium today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler. We certainly really appreciate the rigor with which you bring a lot of this research out into practice. And I have a question for you, if you're still on.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Thank you, Tyler. So, of integrating some contemplative practice, you had a lot of suggestions for how we can translate this into practice from the research. A lot of great resources with the Flourishing app that Matt linked below. My question for you is, how are you personally embodying human flourishing in your life? We know that you are a superhuman in terms of the research that you are leading, and we so appreciate that. How do you anchor yourself as a leader?
It's a very, very, very good question, and certainly, with respect to the daily demands, it is important to have those anchors. For me, I think many of the institutions I listed really are present and embodied in my own life. Certainly the workplace, my colleagues at the Human Flourishing Program are a tremendous support and very much empower this work. I'm very grateful for Harvard University itself and providing the support, the possibility to run this program. But then more personally, my family has been and is critical. Both my family of origin, my parents, and the love I received from them, but my family today as well. My wife and my two children have been a tremendous support for me also. And then finally, I would point to religious community, the Christian church, its teachings, its practices sustain me on a daily basis, as does periods of quiet, of silence, of contemplative prayer. It's difficult for me to envision life without that support and without all of those supports. While I do think the research points to these various institutions for flourishing, and I think is on strong empirical ground, I've certainly experienced that personally in my life as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that personal experience. Really, really beautiful. And certainly we'll aim to embody some of this contemplative practice and hear more from all of our wonderful speakers. So thank you again, Tyler. And now I am excited to introduce the amazing Albina Krasnodemska. Albina, I know you're here with us. I just want to introduce you. I met Albina through the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community. I was doing some leadership development work with them, and then she invited me to keynote at their annual summit, and I just fell in love with the community. And Albina will talk about the community a bit more in terms of the global hubs, but I really want to emphasize that Albina is the glue that holds together this global community of young leaders. And so for the past 6.5 years, she has been leading community engagement and growth and the community in all different capacities, headquartered at Geneva at the World Economic Forum. And so she oversees 14,000 volunteers from 150 countries around the globe. And she is really passionate about empowering leaders, young leaders in particular, to achieve their full potential. Before this, she did work for a variety of sports organizations, but she also worked on the very important economic aspects of Ukrainian road safety and improving the media landscape at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. She has also worked as the first foreign reporter to North Africa from Ukraine, spending 3 years in Morocco, and working in the PR industry and the United Nations as a consultant for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. She's quite passionate about languages, and it looks like she actually speaks about 6 of them. So Albina, without further ado, thank you for all the work that you do for the community, and thank you for the work that you do for the world. Albina, are you with us? Would you? Yes, wonderful. Okay, so I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Noémie. I'm blushing here. It's always weird to hear something about yourself, but I'm mostly delighted to be part of this important session today, this symposium, and I'm so thankful that you thought about the community and what we do. To be very honest, when Noémie introduced me to all of the important work that you do in well-being and human flourishing, these concepts were completely new to me. And I was wondering how comes Noémie insists that it would be good for me to share what we do with the Global Shapers community. And I started to dig deeper and deeper actually about your work and being interested more in actually the Global Flourishing study that we have just heard about from Tyler. And just now I realized that, for instance, this flourishing index that we saw in the previous presentation They are very, very related to what we do in the Global Shapers community, because in our everyday work, we put in the first place the life satisfaction of young people who are the members of our community. We are putting in the first place the the meaning of purpose and meaning in everything they do, and we promote how important it is to to fulfill their potential actually. And we work every day on creating this close social relationships and friendships that Matt has mentioned about at the very beginning. So I'm delighted to share a little bit about our work. And yes, I'm very passionate about our community of young leaders. So I will share a few slides just to give you an idea of what we do, and then maybe if you have any questions, also happy to take them.
Thank you, Albina. We see your slides.
Can you see them? Perfect. So when think about the Global Shapers community, we very often present it as the scalable solution to mobilize the full potential of young people. And as I was preparing for this meeting today, I realized that what we call mobilizing the full potential of young people is very similar to what we call human flourishing, actually. And our community today is a huge network of young people who drive dialogue, action, and change. But most importantly, it has been created with the goal to empower young people and make sure that the voices of young people, the issues young people care about, are brought to the decision makers and are included on all levels in the all of the important discussions. So we want to help them really amplify their voices, and we want to also change the way world sees young people. We very often hear, this clash between the generations, and very often when we talk to young people from especially certain countries where they have very little power also in politics, we hear that they are seen mostly as the trouble, not as a part of the solution. So this is the dimension we would like to change. And we realize that we can only do it if we help in this very important, critical, age when you have a lot of energy, and when you, what we call, still have this pink glasses, you believe that you can change the world, you believe that everything is possible. When we give important, necessary tools for you to succeed, with your ambitions, and your ambitions do not are not just words, but are actually implemented into very concrete actions. We think we can succeed. But what is also important is that we help these young people to strive in very safe and healthy environments. And when we create these environments, what we call hubs, incredible things happen. So today, we of course are very proud of what we have achieved. The community exists since 11 years only, and it has been founded by the founder of the World Economic Forum, who has been a huge ambassador of actually young people as stakeholders. When we talk about the global future, he insisted at some point that we cannot go on and put all of the stakeholders, business, government, civil society, scientists together and disregard young people, because we're talking about half of the population of the world. And we really need to understand today that these are people who will be mostly affected tomorrow by what we do today. And these people have very different and innovative ideas about the world, and they have energy to build better society for tomorrow. So with that, we achieved in 11 years 14,000 members, 10,000 active members, and 4,000 alumni. We're based today in 150 countries and territories, and we have almost reached 500 city-based hubs. And I'm very proud that Noémie helped us also to bring the community to Manhattan, to New York, when she founded a few time ago the separate community there. So with the projects that our community is implementing as volunteers on the local level, because we believe that change happens one town, one community at a time before we can create any global change. You have to look what is wrong around you and maybe try to solve that. And if you succeed, then you can bring this knowledge to to the world, and maybe with help of others scale it. We have already reached more than 11 million people with our projects, and if we look at the concrete initiatives implemented in this 150 countries by our volunteers, it's more than 2,000 different projects. So this is quite impressive, because all of this is happening, thanks to this intrinsic motivation of young people. They are not paid for this job. They just found meaning and purpose at some point, and they got together with people who have the very similar, drive to make change and to bring solutions to their local communities, and this is how they operate. So when we look more practically on how we achieve these numbers, because of course we want or we do not want, we have to measure something, and the KPIs in different organizations matter a lot, but we look on 4 different dimensions of impact when we operate. So first and foremost, we put people, we put young people, in the center of our attention, and we make sure that every single member, when they join our community on a local level, they are able to build new skills that help them to mobilize their potential, that help them to live authentically and purposefully. And we also make sure that throughout their membership in their 20s, because we're talking about young people between 18 and 30, they are able to come out of their bubbles, their daily bubbles, and broaden their views, as they are exposed to so many opinions on the community level and on the global level, because we're talking about 150 countries. We also do not underestimate, and I think this is the most important factor of success of our community, this healthy environment that we create, this safe spaces that we want them to join in their hubs. So on the local level, we call our teams hubs, and we purposefully assemble very, very diverse hubs. So you are forced to come to the group of people that all have this willingness to contribute to the local community, to do good, but everyone is bringing very different perspectives, because they come from all walks of life, from different professional environments, from different social, economic environments, and different, ethnic, cultural backgrounds as well. So you are forced, when you discuss these solutions that you might bring to your community, to face very different opinions and to learn to respect them, and to for that to happen, the environment should be really safe, and that's what is in the core of my daily job. So when it happens, then it is very organic that young people trust that others will not judge them, and even the most ambitious ideas get tested. Maybe they do not succeed every time, but they know that they can share their ambitions, and they can collaborate and test new ideas, and they get opportunities to lead and to follow, and then it is being applied on their professional life, and you know, they become like multipliers of this culture that we have in our community. So for me, this is really incredible how young people, you know, dare to change their working environments, their daily environments, because they see through our community that it can actually work. So why don't I bring it to another dimension of my life? Why don't I test it at my workplace? Or why don't I create with these young people, you know, my proper organization or project where we could also live by the same values and principles. And when it happens, we have this local impact, which we actually strive to have, and I have shown the numbers. We achieved more than 2,000 projects by today. And what is important is that it is not imposed by the World Economic Forum or whoever on the top of the organization. It is all done by these volunteers, because we always say that you know much better the community around you, connect to your community, learn from them, and find out how you can help best. So then the change happens on the local communities, but then, as I said, if some initiatives are successful, we give them the opportunity to grow, and we, of course, in the global network, have the opportunity to connect the dots and to create the global impact that then can address very pressing world issues. Our members are, as I said, between 18 and 27 years old, and I apologize for the noise. I hope you can hear me well. Noémie, okay. So what is important is that when they got together, perfect. When they got together a few years ago, they said, you know, we feel we operate with the same values. Why don't we institutionalize that? And why don't we put it for future generations of our shapers of our community as the roadmap, as the guidelines of what we try to actually to practice every day in our actions. And they came up with these values that are common for our community and that help us to understand how we interact with each other. When we look at the geography of this community, we have to keep in mind also different cultural differences, and passion, integrity, commitment, cooperation, and service became you know, our most important values that help us to really understand what is the most important for us in daily actions. So after the values have been co-created by the members, they realized that in order to strive, they also have to have some kind of flocking rules, and they came up with the code of conduct. And we were quite amazed in the team to see that what matters a lot for young people today. So this has also been co-created completely by our community members, and what they found important, you know, in their daily work, I think can be replicated in so many different organizations and workplaces where, you know, because if we live by such code of conduct everywhere we operate, we will strive and we will flourish, I believe. So we really believe that we should be accountable to ourselves and others, and that's where the mental health, you know, importance comes in place, because you can only be accountable to yourself if you are true to yourself, also about how you feel today, you know, and maybe sometimes do not commit to too many things. We also create and protect space where individual opinion and potential is valued. This is extremely important for us. Any opinion has a right to exist. We engage proactively, compassionately with the needs of others, because if this does not happen, the collaboration will never be possible. And we communicate clearly, honestly, and respectfully to support each other and fulfill obligations with the differences of languages that we have in our community. It is very important to have very clear and honest communication, so nothing can be misinterpreted. And we collaborate in our hubs, but also in the community, because if we learn from each other, it can only benefit us. We behave with ethically and responsibly, and not just in our personal and professional, but also in our what we call shaper life in our community. So I always look at this code of conduct and values and think if it helped our 14,000 members to operate as volunteers so successfully in this past 11 years, it would be so great to replicate it to more places. And when we talk about the measurement and what is important for us to as KPIs, we have also put a few things that are critically important for each hub to achieve. And if you look at this list, there is just one project that we require our members to achieve. And why we do that is because we know that if they work mostly throughout the year on creating this healthy environment, on really allocating very clear roles and responsibilities, so everyone is doing something meaningful to themselves and contributes in the best capacity. If we really make sure in our daily actions that every member feel they belong and they want to come back to this community and work together towards good in the community, then there will be many different initiatives launched. And indeed, some hubs create even sometimes 15 initiatives a year, sometimes 20. Not all of them take off the ground, but what we learn from the young generation when we have a space without judgment and fear, then we learn from these mistakes. And every time we create the new project, it's always better, and it always is always more ambitious than the previous one as well. So this is what I wanted to share with you, just to give quick introduction of what we do in the community, but maybe the most important learnings that I had in this past almost 7 years are that young people are really looking for very, very different kind of environment in their life, and young people value very different things than previous generations. And if we do not understand it quick enough, as they maybe employers sometimes, we unfortunately will fail, because they choose more and more places where they can flourish, where they are valued as humans, where their well-being is being cared of, and where they can grow and strive, but not just be judged based on their productivity. So this is one thing, but also another thing is that they very often tell me, when I ask why you have joined this community, explain that in their successful careers that sometimes they have, they do not have the possibility to fulfill their full potential, and they do not have the possibility to feel that they give back to the community. So if we disregard this important need of young people who feel they can contribute better to their community, then we can lose a whole group of a whole generation actually. So we give them the opportunity to come together after work and to fulfill this need to contribute to the community, to live meaningfully, and to to have purpose in life in our community. But this could also be done, in their daily work life. Another thing that is very important is that after successful initiative test, they sometimes quit their jobs completely, and I have seen so many examples of those, and they decide to fully commit their life to this new project that they find so meaningful in their life, and they manage to convert it into the full-time job. And I look and I admire on how much strength they have, and how much power they have, willpower. So all of this is important to keep in mind when we work with young people, but also when we work with people, because we want it or not, eventually all of these indicators we're talking about, all of these measurements, they have to change. This is what the new generation is telling us.
Albina, thank you so much. You've touched on so many dimensions of human flourishing. I want to bring a couple of them up. So one of the unique differentiators of human flourishing as a model for well-being that's multidimensional looks at the development of character virtue. And you spoke to so many different dimensions of this within the governance, as well as the code of conduct. And so I'm really inspired that you are helping people embody this not only in governance, but also in communities. And the safe space that you describe is really crucial, as we know, for innovation. But then anchoring in terms of flourishing in life, you took it a step further than flourishing in the workplace, because that's really important. And then creating a space so that they can come and be more than their productivity. So when we talk about transforming organizations and institutions, we often talk about shifting from the view of humans as resources, but as human beings, full human beings. And I know from knowing you that you really live this in your team and really care about one another's well-being. And we have the task force for global well-being, of course, and resilience. So I'd love to know, how are you embodying this work, not only with your team, but in your personal life? I know that you're actually on vacation, tuning in with us, so thank you for that. But when a young person or an older person, whatever generation they're in, discovers that sense of purpose and meaning or is living into it, how do they embody these different pieces so that their journey as a leader is sustainable in terms of the impact they make?
Thank you, Noémie. I wish I could answer very quickly this question, but this is such a deep question. I think for me, it is very important to be authentic in everything I do. And I caught myself, and this might be very personal, but I'm just reflecting on your question, and that's what comes to my mind. I caught myself on a few occasions that I was not up to capabilities.
Oh, we're having a little hard time hearing you, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And as an example, I had a few very difficult moments in life when I was in the midst of grief, or, well, you mentioned I'm Ukrainian, so everything I have been going through this past month was not obvious either. So what I learned from this community as well that I serve, from the global shapers, from these young people who dare to be themselves, And what I embody now is that you should really connect to yourself, deeply connect to yourself every time before you connect to others. And if you cannot, connect to your real feelings at this moment, or if you feel that you do not have energy or you do not have capacities to interact with others. And that's what we do all the time with this community, especially during 2 years of COVID. We have all experienced this continuous interaction, and young people require a lot of energy, a lot of, positive projection. It's better to say no, and to say no to commitments. That's what I mentioned before, because people feel you, and if you are not what you try to project at this particular moment, because something is going on in your life, it will be visible. And I think you should always take care of yourself first and make sure you are all right, you are ready, you have the necessary energy before you communicate to others. Because we have to be mindful of what kind of messages, energy, and authenticity we bring to people around us. It has a huge impact on our environment.
Thank you. Such deep wisdom to really take the time to connect with ourselves. And just want to acknowledge all the amazing work that you're doing, empowering shapers in Ukraine during this time. And hope your family is okay, and that we are thinking of you and appreciate your work there. Thank you, Albina. Really, really deep wisdom on the ability and importance of saying no and setting healthy boundaries so that you have enough energy for the things that matter. And so someone might wonder, well, why are we talking about something like this in a symposium on the economics of well-being and global flourishing? But it's really anchoring it into, again, what we value, what we measure, what we pay attention to. And you're saying, hey, pay attention to how you're feeling before you share, because your presence matters and it influences the network. And we know this from the research on positive spread, on emotional contagion in organizations and in our communities. And so really your advice is anchored not only in contemplative wisdom, but also in the research. Albina, thank you so much for all the work that you do and for your session. Really appreciate it. Okay, so now we are going to transition to our next speaker. While some of those insights and wisdom sort of go deeper, I'd like to introduce John Clifton. John Clifton is the CEO of Gallup. And Gallup, of course, you all know, is an advisory firm that specializes in big data analytics, particularly of employees, customers, students, as well as citizens. But most notably, John has been involved in the Gallup World Poll. And his mission is to help 7 billion citizens be heard, to really share their voices on the most pressing issues in their work lives, as well as their life issues. So what's going on in the geopolitical landscape around them. And so the World Poll is a 100-year initiative spanning 160 countries and regions. And John has actually just released an amazing book called Blind Spot. And we will be sending you more information on that. But let's see, what else can I say, John? There's so much to say. He's a non-resident fellow, senior fellow at Baylor University's Institute for the Studies of Religion, serves on numerous boards at Gallup, the Young Professionals in Foreign Policy Organizations. He's involved in chess. He's also a chess champion. I know his #1 strength is competition. So, we talk about character virtue and the development of those character strengths. And Gallup has been doing this work embodying strengths in organizations in the context of leadership. And certainly your strengths shine through, John. So there's much more to share than the bio, but I really appreciate your insights and wisdom and the way that you challenge the status quo as well. And so looking forward to hearing about blind spot.
Noémie,
and
thank
what
you.
leaders have missed. You're welcome.
Thank you, Noémie. And Tyler, thank you for the comments that you made earlier about our partnership. We at Gallup are very proud of the work that we do with your team, with Templeton, and with Baylor. So thank you for that. One of the things that Tyler talked about is what makes a flourishing life, what makes a thriving life. One of the things that we look at Gallup, in addition to those factors, is what happens to a society when people aren't flourishing, and what happens to a society when people are unhappy. And that's what I want to share with you today. And so, like most Gallup individuals, I come fully armed with slides. And here they are, which, again, I'm going to talk about the global rise of unhappiness. Now, when you think about this, and oftentimes people hear about happiness, they often hear of the Global Happiness Report. That's the team that SDN does that. They actually use Gallup data, and it is life evaluation data. Rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10. That's why the Nordic countries are always at the top, and countries like Haiti, the Palestinian territories, are always at the bottom. It's just people rating their life on a hypothetical ladder. But a lot of times people see that information and they consume it for entertainment, and they don't consume it for policy. And I think that's a mistake, and here's why. I just want to look back at two of the most significant events of the past 15 years. And the first one has to do with the Arab Spring. So if we look back to the Arab Spring, in Egypt, of course, not where it started, obviously started in Tunisia in Sidi Bouzid, where Mohammed Bouazizi self-immolated. It was originally called the Jasmine Revolution. And then, of course, it spread to 14 other countries, including Egypt. And the imagery from Tahrir Square is what most of us are familiar with. But if we look at the lead up to the Arab Spring, and you look at traditional indicators like GDP per capita, what did it tell us? It looked like this. This is GDP per capita in the lead up to the Arab Spring. If you look at the Human Development Index that comes out by the United Nations, of course, that is 3 elements that go into that index. 1/3 of it is sort of income. The others have to do with life expectancy and education. But that too showed perfect progress in Egypt, and it showed perfect progress in Tunisia. By the way, if you also look at Tunisia's GDP per capita, it showed almost exactly the same growth over a 5-year period of time. But how did people feel? Because when we asked them, rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10, what did they tell us? The first time we did a survey in Egypt to say, tell us how your life is going, we found that roughly 28% of people were thriving. That collapsed all the way down to 9% while the Arab uprising happened in 2011. Now, interestingly enough, that collapse put Egypt on par with the Palestinian territories, whereas in 2006, that 28% put them on par with the global average. So this is a pretty significant decline that took place in Egypt. The exact same decline took place in Tunisia. It was 24% back in 2006, and it dropped all the way down to about 11% in the lead up to the Arab Spring, also putting Tunisia on par with the Palestinian territories. In fact, the largest drop that we saw in all 14 countries where this took place was in Bahrain. Of course, Bahrain's GDP per capita is around 35th highest in the world. 44% of people in Bahrain were thriving 2 years in the lead up to the Arab Spring, and it collapsed down to about 11-14%, also putting oil-rich Bahrain on par with the Palestinian territories. So again, these are some really concerning trends that we saw just in terms of people's mood. But it wasn't just the Arab Spring where we saw this. We also saw it in this country. Now, of course, the most significant event that took place at this time was Brexit, or excuse me, over the past decade was Brexit. In 2016, in June, that's when the official vote took place. And here's what GDP per capita looked like in the lead up to it. We actually found that, of course, not unlike what took place in Egypt, Tunisia, and Bahrain, GDP per capita was rising. In fact, the quarter before Brexit took place, GDP per capita grew 2%, and unemployment dropped below 5% for the first time in the lead up to Brexit. A lot of economists actually kind of call that the normal rate of unemployment or the optimal rate. So a lot of people at that time were saying that the economic situation in the UK was going well. In fact, if you look at the Human Development Index, it was the second highest that they'd ever hit in the history of their country. this was such a powerful argument that David Cameron actually kind of bet his job on it. And he went around and told people exactly his quote was, if you vote for Brexit, it would be like putting a bomb under our economy. And polls actually showed when you interviewed people throughout the UK and said, if you vote to leave, what do you think would happen? And a majority actually said, we know this will be bad for the economy, but we still want to do it. And actually one poll showed that people said, but if we vote for it, it'll be better for our lives. Think about that. And then when we ask people throughout the UK, how's your life going? This is what we found. That drop from 55% to 40% from 2013 to 2015 is still one of the largest two-year drops that we've ever seen in the history of our database. And had that been a rise in unemployment over a two-year period of 15 points, it would have been headlines everywhere. But interestingly enough, just because it's how people feel, it's not headlines anywhere. Again, because a lot of times leaders aren't necessarily paying attention to this, although David Cameron did initiate a lot of this tracking. And right now at the Office of National Statistics, they are now tracking how people's lives are going to the tune of 300,000 interviews per year. So again, these are just two examples. We saw something similar in the United States in the 2016 election. We did not see it at the national level in terms of declines in well-being. What we did see was that in various congressional districts that broke for Trump, that's where we saw the biggest declines in well-being. So again, elections, of course, take place because of the Electoral College in the United States. So it is interesting that, of course, Hillary won the popular. So we did not see something at the national level, but we did within the regional level during that election. So moving forward, just what does this look like when Gallup does these kind of surveys? We do about 140 countries every single year, and 2/3 of them we do face-to-face interviewing. We break up most countries in what look like in US congressional districts, meaning the actual physical territory looks a lot like something that would reflect the population. So every one of those flags has an equal number of people living within them. And then we interview about 8 to 12 people using an advanced methodology to make sure that everyone has an equal chance of being selected. This is actually what it looks like in the field. So you'll see that this gentleman, he's one of our interviewers. He is Indonesian. He's doing it in the local language. We translate our questionnaires into every single local language. If 5% of the country speaks the language, we have to make it available in that language. You'll see that he's holding a handheld device that has no utility outside of survey research. So when they've been stolen in the past, unfortunately, I think people that think it'll have utility like an iPad have to painfully learn that all you can do is do questionnaires on it. It does have GPS coordinates so that we can see if people actually went to the houses that we wanted them to go to. And we can also record the time in terms of how long they actually spent there. So this is our most advanced technology, and it really helps us get a higher quality of data. We also go into the field. You can see this is me here. Because we also want to hear from a qualitative perspective. So because there is a white American sitting in this room, this interview is thrown out, but I get to follow along in Mongolian just so that I can listen along and hear what she's saying to various questions. And if I thought there was some sort of interesting response, then we can go back through and adjust it for the future or add it to kind of our qualitative understanding. This particular interview was something more fascinating because one of the questions that we ask people is, do you feel safe walking alone at night? Now, of course, the best leaders in the world that we've talked to don't just want to make communities safe. They also want to make people feel safe. So what is it that concerns them? Because oftentimes when I hear a community is dangerous, I think of one thing, which is crime. And of course, there are certain ways to address crime. And so we went and asked her, do you feel safe walking alone at night? She said, no. So later at the end of the interview, we said, what is it that you're afraid of at night? Now, again, I would think that it has something to do with crime. That's not what she said. She said, well, I'm afraid of our rabid dogs. We have a massive problem with rabid dogs here in our community. Now, a leader of that community needs to know that what's making people not feel safe is rabid dogs, because if your assumption was wrong, then the harder you work at fixing that problem, the worse you'll make your community. So this is one of the ways to figure out what it is that's really concerning people, because of course, physical safety is key to somebody living a great life. This is the coverage that we've had to date. So you'll see here that our coverage map includes almost every single country in the world. If we're doing face-to-face interviewing, then we are unable to get into places where a war is going on or where the conflict is so severe that it's not safe for our interviewers. That took place in the Central African Republic. We have not been back since 2017. We also have not been back to Syria in a few years because, of course, making sure that people are safe is of the utmost importance. But to date, we've almost done 170 countries. We've not been into North Korea. This sounds like kind of a tragic joke, but the idea of going door to door and asking people how their lives are going is probably not something Kim Jong-un would really want us to do. You also see Papua New Guinea. We pay for all of this ourselves, so that makes it very challenging for us to afford expensive countries like Papua New Guinea, but it is something that's on our radar, and we hope to get there very soon. I do want to just share with you one more thing, and it's what I would consider the most concerning trend that I've seen in our database for a long time. Danny Kahneman encouraged us 15 years ago that if we're going to do this work, he said, make sure you understand how people live life. Ask them about how much anger they have in their life. Ask them how much sadness they have. Ask them about their physical pain, their worry, their stress. And, you know, it's amazing how much people will tell you if you just ask them, because people are very candid about how much anger they have in their life. They're very candid about how much sadness they have in their life. And this is what we asked them. Now, in the first years of our tracking, we did find that there were large populations, particularly in war-torn countries or places where there had been an economic collapse, that they shared with us that they did indeed have and experience a lot of negative emotions. But it was flat for the world up until about 10 years ago. And about 10 years ago, we found what we've seen as our most concerning trend, because when we aggregate those 5 negative emotions, this is what we find. That trend of negative emotions has been increasing steadily for a decade straight. We came out and launched a report on this about 3 years ago. I guess I should say, 2020. And the media heard it and they said, why is this news? Of course, negative emotions are at a record high. We just suffered through COVID. This was before inflation or war in Ukraine. It may have been alongside the war in Ethiopia. But again, people felt like they were not surprised because they blamed it on COVID. The problem is that the rise in anger, sadness, stress, physical pain, and worry happened before COVID. So we cannot solely blame COVID on this global rise. And most fascinating is you might say, well, where is this happening? Interestingly enough, it's happening almost all over the world at exactly the same rate. So you look at China, it's going up tremendously. If you look at India, it is, Brazil, Mexico, it's ticking up in Western Europe. The only place where it's not increasing is the United States. When we first did this in the United States, we found that the United States ranked about 20th in this index. Negative emotions were very high. Today, the United States ranks 50th. Why? Because the rest of the world increased so much faster than the United States. So if there is something that has to do with negative emotions, we caught it first, and now the world's catching up to us. Noémie, those are my comments for today because I'm really concerned about it, but I also want everybody to know that I think this is extremely fixable. And the reason I say that is because what drives negative emotions are aspects of our lives that I think leaders everywhere can improve. For one of the biggest sources of daily misery for all humans is work. So we spend, my estimate was around 85,000 hours of our life. There's another estimate done out of Australia that says 110,000 hours of our life working. The only thing we do more of in our life is sleep. And so when you are miserable at work, your life is almost perfectly aligns. You will be miserable in life. And a lot of us who work in organizations can help influence that, because people who are doing well at work, they also do well in terms of their work product and do well for customers. So as we kind of watch this business roundtable in 2019 announce to the world that they stand for stakeholder capitalism, not shareholder capitalism, in hindsight, it would have been awesome if they would have announced that they stand for worker well-being and a thriving workplace, because had they done that, that could help bring down this rising temperature that's really concerning. On that note, thank you, Noémie, for having me, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Really, really great point. This question about embodiment is really about how we are living our values. And so the Business Roundtable is a really great example of that. How did that translate into decisions that were made during the pandemic and now? And so shifting that focus to greater well-being from a business perspective and from our lens of sustainability and measuring ESG from a human sustainability perspective is something that we share in terms of our values. So John, in your professional life, how are you embodying this work to create the space for a healthier organization And how do you do that in your personal life? And what advice would you give leaders beyond measuring, but taking it to the next step, which is action? So once you listen, how do you embody that change across the system?
Well, I think one of the biggest ways, again, that I can influence others' well-being is in the workplace. And as I mentioned before, we find that it is the single biggest driver, if not one of the biggest drivers of a great life. And how a person is doing in the workplace, their work well-being, it's not particular rocket science in order to help them flourish at work. Why? Because what people need is they need to be in a position where they can use their strengths. People need to know what's expected of them. They actually need to get along with their colleagues. They need to feel attached to the mission and purpose of an organization. And I think this is low-hanging fruit that leaders everywhere can do. And I believe at Gallup, we're driving that as much as we can to create a place where people feel like they're thriving at work.
Thank you, John. And so how are you embodying your own personal well-being
Well,
on a day-to-day basis?
We see that there are 5 elements of a great life: your work well-being or your career well-being, your community, your financial, your physical, and your social. And I'm getting married this fall, so I think my social is boosted because of my fiance. So that would be it.
Beautiful. Well, congratulations. Thank you so much. Great presentation and a lot to think about. So we are now going to transition to another great speaker as we let those insights simmer in terms of global well-being, negative emotions, and what we can do in our organizations. So Andrew Sarazen is the president of the Templeton World Charity Foundation. And he's an interesting person in that his background is as a scientist in molecular research and is now leading all of the philanthropic activities of the Templeton World Charity Foundation. But he's also an entrepreneur. And so Andrew has been merging this kind of systems level thinking and anchoring it in business innovation for quite some time, working as a key scientific advisor to organizations like Mars, and looking at the development of nutritious food choices for consumers in Africa as well as Asia. In addition to being a lecturer, assistant professor in the zoology department at the University of Oxford, he's done research on infectious diseases, taught numerous courses, and served as a Rhodes Scholar. I think there's so much to share, but I know, Andrew, that your organization, the Templeton World Charity Foundation, is enabling a lot of the research that we are discussing today. And so large implications for translation into practice. I also want to highlight that you are a YGL. You are a young global leader for the World Economic Forum. So definite connections there with the Global Shapers community. Andrew, we are honored to have you and looking forward to some of these insights that we have covered and discussed before.
Well, thank you, Noémie, and Matt and Tyler, for the opportunity to speak today. Amazing speakers. We've covered, feel like we've covered quite a bit of ground. I can just share that, around 2019, I hadn't, seen the data from Gallup on the global rise of unhappiness. I thought that was amazing. But around 2019, I think at the Templeton World Charity Foundation, we started thinking hard about our strategy and in particular how to connect our mission space and our passion for interdisciplinary research to some of the problems that the world faces. And it certainly seemed to be the case that there was this divergence. I think this divergence between material wealth and well-being and what you might call psychological or spiritual wealth and well-being. And the data that we just saw kind of beautifully show that kind of dissociation. I remember speaking to Alison Gopnik, a world-renowned psychologist, about Steven Pinker's book on the the better angels of our nature. That this sort of broad scale kinds of progress, measurement of violent death, measurement of child mortality, measurement of of GDP per capita, showing over the broad scope of history that there's such a that there's this narrative of progress, and I and pointed out at the time that things like interpersonal trust, or humility, or happiness, life satisfaction, these kinds of factors inside of us may not have be moving at the same rate that we might see sort of externally. So those kinds of sort of inclinations, I think, have borne fruit, sadly, and set the stage for the work at TWCF going forward, and starting in 20 let's see, so I'm loading up here, starting in go back. In 2020, we announced a strategy really at the height of on human flourishing, that over the next 5 years we'll commit at least $100 million, not only to the support of scientific research on human flourishing, but to translate these discoveries into practical tools. And moreover, policy communities. We see the discussion at the levels of education ministries, finance ministries, World Economic Forum, that flourishing is a useful concept, especially now. I don't think there's no person alive on the planet that hasn't asked themselves these basic questions of, what do I value and why do I value it? What do I believe and why do I believe it? What do I sacrifice for? It really questions not of survival, but rather the stuff that makes existence worthwhile, really the fundamentals of flourishing. So this kind of introspection became real in terms of a commitment from the foundation, and really I'll use the beginning of my time to just talk about the elements of that, and then particularly focus on economics. We have a threefold kind of approach to flourishing. Discovery, so basic fundamental research on sort of physical, mental, social, spiritual well-being, neuroscience, cognitive science, psychology, philosophy, theology. These are the things that when you hear about the Templeton philanthropies, you might think of. We've got really some amazing programs on consciousness research. We're basically the sort of where and how do we come to have this amazing subjective experience, and how do we make progress on understanding that? We also have an amazing program on the constellation of intelligences, the diverse intelligences that exist in nature, or that are created by us. And I think both of those speak to this question that of value. What is it that we value about us? Do we just value IQ or rote problem solving, or do we value things like care or cooperation? And by studying those in the broadest sort of suite of ways, we can inform our own intelligence and our own aspirations. That's in the discovery space. In the development space, we seek to translate the findings we fund and others fund into practical tools and interventions. And so we've got a large program in character strengths around the world, so gratitude, forgiveness, very grateful for the work of Tyler and Ev Worthington to run the world's largest randomized control trial on forgiveness workbooks, which hope to have data on the effects of mental and physical health effects of education, to look at how to better equip young people and students with an ability to understand how to get knowledge, how to ask the right questions. I'm fond of saying that, the world is awash in data. Information is almost limitless. We have some knowledge, but even less wisdom. And students really need to understand how to integrate data sources across disciplines so that they can make their own choices. And then lastly, in launch, this is a space that seeks to create resources and platforms to spread these innovations. And our best example at the moment of a platform is around the sort of science and practice of forgiveness. And so we have a campaign called Discover Forgiveness. You can go to discoverforgiveness.org, where we've have a very prestigious and amazing scientific advisory council that scans the best literature out there. And so we have 70 different papers on various aspects of forgiveness, and that program will seek to collate some of the world's best tools so that, whether you're an educator, a mental health professional, a policymaker, a religious leader, you have the best tools that can help spread the word about this really amazing intervention. Another note just about, how we think about flourishing. Tyler at the beginning of the hour talked about, or the seminar talked about, these different dimensions of flourishing. We think about flourishing as both a current state as well as a desired ultimate end, and inspired by our founder, Sir John Templeton. We think it's more than just good health or happiness. All those things are important, or really possibly even virtue. I think the conceptual space of flourishing is really, really important. That we do a good job of expanding beyond, I think, our own narrow definitions of flourishing. Sometimes, happiness or hedonic models or virtue eudaimonic models may be limiting in some way. And so for us, flourishing isn't just about achieving, a point in time. It does concern the ultimate. It does concern the transcendent, the things that religious institutions and communities really pay attention to. Similarly, and I think kind of in a complementary way, things like resilience, the how suffering can be processed, how adversity can be used for accelerating personal growth. These are also part and parcel to conceptual models of flourishing. Sir John Templeton had this concept of, that the earth for him was a school, it's training. And for this discussion about economics, that self-determination is important, and freedom really is fundamental to this. And so on that note, some words of, about the relationship between freedom, progress, and flourishing. Sir John said that freedom fosters a kind of constructive competition that makes progress possible, or that perhaps one of the greatest developments in human history is the increasing possibility for the freedom of each individual to grow and to learn and to develop. Maybe some seminar attendees might be interested in it. It sort of we tend to think about individualism in the most negative terms, and hyper individualism and concern for atomization of society. It's a really interesting book because it kind of traces this longer history where the concept of the individual as having rights, as having innate value, really emerged in the Enlightenment in Europe, and the important role that concept plays for us today. It's called inventing the individual. I think one thing to note in the context of economics is this idea that that there's an end, that there's a sort of purpose to economics, that it's not an end in and of itself. That the pursuit of profit and of revenue, is about something greater than that, and that economics is a tool for the production of something. And so, here, Sir John, our founder, said that if people cannot see beyond material accumulation, even a prosperous and I think I'd underscore efficient economy lacks an ultimate purpose. So you see that there is something there for him. Sir John was the world's he was an inventor of emerging market mutual funds. So he looked around the world for value, and that even for somebody who is an entrepreneur, a businessman, that this idea of spiritual wealth was more important than material wealth. At the same time, I think our perspectives on some key factors that enable flourishing in a society stem from this philosophical tradition of what's called classical liberalism. So things like property rights and the rule of law, free trade, a culture of accountability, personal responsibility. Thinkers like Adam Smith and Hayek and von Mises. There's really amazing history on the what's so-called Austrian school of economics, called marginal revolutionaries that you can think about, and more in more contemporary terms. Nobel laureate Ned Phelps in his book Mass Flourishing sort of makes the case that these things combined with entrepreneurship and innovation makes for a dynamic economy. And a dynamic economy is something that not only provides for the broad scale distribution of resources, but also the broad scale opportunities to participate. And so for Ned Phelps, flourishing is really at the heart of prospering, and certain values drive that. And so you can think about the psychological values of society and individuals within society, and the direct correlation between that and economic growth. And so for him, things like engagement, meeting challenges, the thrill of discovery, self-expression, personal growth, these are all values that enable mass flourishing. And moreover, metrics like firm creation, like intellectual property growth, like entrepreneurship, these values are not to be associated solely with GDP. In fact, actually, all of those things have fallen in recent times. And so, measuring sort of economic productivity as a whole misses these sort of features of dynamism that Phelps would argue are really important. So last year we had recognized like an opportunity in our grant making to contemporary challenges, and there are a couple of different gaps that we'd hoped to address. The first being a knowledge gap, in some sense that the discipline of economics has lost its focus. It was too focused on evaluating specific policy proposals or being too abstract. And I think, an idea of returning to some of the fundamental principles like property rights, like markets, and a couple of quotes from advisors that we have here show this, that, ironically, the market has not actually been a central concern to economists, or that, in the literature today contains so little discussions of the market, and really the market as a means to solve problems, as a means for efficient transfer of information. And there's also a data gap that, like other social sciences, the economics suffers really from a weird country bias. I hope so. Weird being Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic settings. And so it's very important for us, again, to move beyond those settings in terms of studying how those fundamental economic principles relate to measures of flourishing. So we set up a fund, Economics and Human Flourishing Fund. This is run by two of my colleagues, Tracy Farquharson and Michael Bloom, who have done an amazing job of focusing this effort on really empirical research. So sort of leaving some of the advocacy and ideology of economics behind, but focusing on empirical research where theories of freedom and free markets can be evaluated based on data, a global focus. And then I think an interesting thing for philanthropy more generally is an idea that we don't choose the grantees. We establish a network of what we call champions who recommend ideas and grantees for us. And so we're sort of externalizing the decision-making in a nice way that changes some of the typical power dynamics in philanthropy. So in last year, April to December, we ran the first round of this. We have a second round currently in progress. I've listed, we've listed the champions for this effort and their institutions. So, institutions all over the world and also kind of across the political spectrum. So from Oxford to Our World in Data, University of Chicago, Georgetown, Mercatus, and others. And they, I'll give you a few examples of the results. So some of the questions that they, I think we had 12 projects funded in the first round. That I'll talk about today is,
Hey, Andrew.
Dealing with some of the contemporary challenges. Yeah.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? So sorry, I think you're cutting out a little bit.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think
So
we're gonna have you come back.
yeah.
To do some more of this in our next symposium.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No
I'm not
worries.
I'm not in a place with great internet. So
No problem. Is it okay? I'd like to just ask you a closing question before we go to our final speaker.
Okay.
So I love, thank you so much for highlighting all of this. And we'll also send a snapshot as well as a link for people who might be more interested in maybe applying for funding or sharing their projects. I think this is really, really impactful and important work. I love how you emphasize this space for human flourishing also in the context of learning and also pointing the way to post-traumatic growth. I know in our conversation, you shared with me this beautiful example that I hadn't thought about of bankruptcy as an embodied systems level forgiveness kind of intervention. So I'd like to ask you, as we sort of get ready to close this event and hand it over to Alana, how do you anchor this in your own personal life and your professional life, and also your vision for how to integrate this spiritual wealth that you described?
I think, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm sorry I ran a little long. Hopefully, we can wrap up. But
wonderful.
I think you can't help but be transformed, I think, by this paradigm of flourishing. And so, you can think about that as sort of bringing in a set of tools for a toolbox, and whether that's things like forgiveness, interpersonal forgiveness, or listening. We tend to think about the freedom of speech as a right, but we also have an obligation to listen. And so these sort of tools that we use, or gratitude being a really, really powerful tool. And I think all of that for me, philosophically, comes down to like a question of what we're trying to optimize. We're not trying to optimize for efficiency or productivity. Human beings are not set up to optimize for efficiency. And I think that's true in a personal life and in the workplace, that we have other aspirations, other goals, other ends, and some of these tools of flourishing, like listening and gratitude and forgiveness, help us sort of reorient towards some of these other ends. And so we just had a retreat for our team last week where it was really we committed. We actually, interestingly, we committed to doing less. Interesting. It was a commitment to do less and less focus on performance, efficient performance, and more on the very things like, that we're talking about here today in terms of flourishing.
Thank you so much. More on the thread that Albina was describing of setting those limits, right? And then emphasizing what we value and really investing there. Thank you so much, Andrew. I know we could spend all day, and we look forward to having you here again. Thank you so much. So, Alana, I am excited to introduce you last but not least. And thank you everyone for your patience. We will likely go a few minutes over as Alana is able, but there will be future symposia, so stay tuned for that. And the information we'll send out after the event. But without further ado, Alana Levy is the Managing Director of Public Sector for Gallup. And she also has a really, really unique vantage point to share in that she did work and live in South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. So prior to joining Gallup, Alana lived and worked in Johannesburg, South Africa for 4 years and spent about 7 years leading research engagements, managing country offices for ABT Associates across Sub-Saharan nations such as Nigeria, Namibia, Zambia, Ethiopia, Malawi, Botswana. And a key strand of her research and her consulting has been supporting the ability of private health sectors to deliver essential health services, brokering effective public-private partnerships in the provision of healthcare, especially for women. And so in this time of change, both in the US and around the world, really emphasizing and understanding what's going on for a huge sector of the population that impacts both women and men. Alana is going to speak about the Global Women's Health Index. And Alana is a wonderful person to work with and colleague. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I promise I will be brief. I know this has been an incredibly stimulating 2 hours. And what I wanted to do was just touch on this really robust and unique data set that Gallup is really fortunate to have led with our partner Hologic, which is one of the world's leading manufacturers of life-saving critical women to diagnose women's health conditions. Together, we embarked on a really innovative, multi-year comprehensive effort to try to assess the state of women's health globally and to use that really as a tool to improve lives and extend life expectancy for women worldwide. And I'm going to try to make a few comments to orient you to the data set, but then also to talk about the relationship to flourishing. And as Noémie mentioned, I've spent a lot of time in Sub-Saharan Africa and in South Africa in particular. And I'm going to end showing you some data from South Africa, which I think does reflect and represent some of the dichotomies of flourishing. And the fact, and I'm so excited, as John mentioned, for the Global Flourishing study, Tyler's presentation made me even more excited, but I think one of the things that we'll see also in this data set is assessing what really predicts flourishing and the relationship between these different variables, even in the realm of health, is confounding and really important to understand. So John oriented you to our flagship global survey instrument, the World Poll. In our partnership with Hologic, we've added 10 unique questions about women's health globally, and we combine that with some of the evergreen World Poll items that we ask. And we really have a large data set, and I'm going to share some results from 2020, which was the first year of administration. New results from 2021 are coming soon. But 120,000 women and men were surveyed. And when we talk about the Global Women's Health Index, we're going to drill down to the perceptions of 60,000 women. And here we really looked at knowledge, attitudes, behaviors related to health, and understanding, often for the first time, female perspectives on core female health issues, including non-communicable diseases, how they've experienced care. How frequently are you going to a doctor? Are you satisfied with the provision of care in your country? Prenatal care, which we know, of course, is an essential female health service. Age of first pregnancy, global emotions and emotional health for women, and how much women feel domestic violence is an concerning problem in their country. So as we put together and we constructed this index, we saw that 5 dimensions of women's health can really change and lengthen their lives. And these 5 dimensions explain more than 80% of variance in women's average life expectancy at birth. So big picture, you improve these dimensions and you extend women's lives. So looking at opinions of health and safety, individual health, emotional health, preventative care, and basic needs. And you can see here as we present, these correlates, that countries on the right-hand side, Japan, Australia, Germany, countries that you would expect longer life expectancy for women, higher scores on the Global Women's Health Index. Now, something that might stand out to you, and I think that this sort of represents one of the first dichotomies around economics and health, is for the United States. So the US spends more per capita on healthcare for both men and women than any other country on planet Earth, spending over $10,000 per capita per person, but clearly does not have the best health outcomes for its population, both for men and for women. On the Women's Health Index, the United States is ranked only 26, which is pretty remarkable given the amount of money spent per capita. It's something that researchers are unraveling. But I think it sort of sets the stage that expenditure does not always correlate with good outcomes related to health, that there's more going on. So a few of the global findings, just high level from the first year, is that every country or territory has room to improve on women's health. The average score was only 54 out of 100. So when we constructed that index of those 5 dimensions, opinions of health and safety, individual health, emotional health, preventative care, basic needs, globally, we saw a pretty poor state of women's health, and the highest score of 69 out of 100 was from Taiwan, but everyone has room to improve. Particularly, the world is weak on preventative care, and over 1.5 billion women did not get any testing whatsoever for the most serious conditions and diseases facing women, and that's high blood pressure, that's cancer, that's diabetes, and that's sexually transmitted infections. And only 1 in 3 women worldwide had any blood pressure testing in the previous 12 months. Even though with so much focus, of course, rightly so, on COVID and other infectious disease, heart disease is still the leading cause of death globally. It's absolutely, essential for women's lives. 10 million people died from cancer last year. Half of those were women. Only 12% of women in 2020 said that they've been tested for any type of cancer in the past 12 months. And we know that there are inexpensive, important screenings for cancer prevention and detection, including mammography, pap smears, and very, very few women globally are accessing that. And millions are also struggling just with basic foundational needs. So 34% of women struggled to afford food in the past year. Nearly 3 in 10 reported that they were unable to afford adequate shelter. In our research and in the longitudinal nature of this study, we absolutely are seeing the impact of the pandemic disrupting critical health services, derailing a lot of progress that had been made in building certain infrastructure for health and reducing the burden of certain diseases. So we're seeing the resurgence of some disease because of divestment and divertment of resources to COVID. However, just like John was showing that the trend around negative emotions, yes, potentially was enhanced during COVID, but this trend to the negative predated COVID, we're seeing the same thing in healthcare as well for women. So I just want to move quickly to Sub-Saharan Africa. Women in countries with universal health coverage, or UHC, are more likely to see a doctor at least once a year. And we do know that seeing a doctor at least once a year has a strong predictive improvement in healthcare. I think, again, looking at that multidimensional nature, as we think about the Global Flourishing study and some other studies, trying to explain why are certain people more likely to see doctors than others? Is it just about availability of healthcare workers? You know, I think the traditional public health community says more healthcare workers, you enhance availability, everybody will go. But we know from the experience of the United States, where there is high availability, but preventative healthcare outcomes and regular seeing doctors is still not where it should be. It suggests to me that there may be other factors related to that conscious choice of seeing a doctor for regular preventative care. It could be family structure, it could be, you know, education systems, it could be having friends, it could be, you know, religious leaders speaking about it. But I think one of the things that we're learning in the flourishing community is just, you know, simply focusing on financing and access for healthcare probably won't get us the improvements that we're really looking for. There's probably more to it. So let's look now about cancer. So as I mentioned, most African women have had no screening or very, very limited screening for any type of cancer in the past 12 months. Globally, only 12% of women have received any cancer screening. And here you see, you know, the highest in Sub-Saharan Africa is Zambia with 29% of women receiving cancer screening. Nigeria, the lowest at 2%. Again, we see that there's not a linear relationship between GDP and expenditure on healthcare and how much these life-saving preventative services are making their way to women. Zambia, obviously very low GDP. Countries like Zimbabwe, you know, universally known to have very low GDP, but still are able to bring some of these life-saving screenings at a higher rate than other more wealthy countries. And for sexually transmitted disease or infection, globally, only 11% of women have had any screening for sexually transmitted diseases. But in some sub-Saharan countries, including poor ones, you see really high rates at 48%, 47%, South Africa as well at 47%, likely to do with the incredible donor-funded investments in HIV screening through the PEPFAR program and other programs, allowing that infrastructure to be used for more general screening for other sexually transmitted diseases. However, this idea of sexual health and caring for sexual health and being able to openly talk about it, it's another example from a flourishing perspective that there's a lot more going on than just expenditure and availability of services. You know, how communities acknowledge and treat sexual and reproductive health, the way stigma is interlaid, the relationships between men and women, negotiating sexual autonomy. These are all really important factors that I think are more largely in the flourishing realm than just the traditional public health realm. Okay, and I'm going to end here because I know we're running out of time. And I just wanted to share a little bit about what I see as the dichotomy of South Africa. And I'm so excited that South Africa is included in the Global Flourishing study. So the Hologic Women's Health Index, all of the data can be accessed in an open source microsite that I believe Noémie has shared in the chat. And with that microsite, you can both, get downloads of data, conduct your own analyses, or you can use our reporting tool to look at the overall index score and dimension data for particular countries and see the rankings. So here on the left-hand side, I used that tool last night and I pulled out South Africa data and wanted to share just some very interesting dichotomies. So overall, South Africa is ranked 50 out of the 116 countries that were surveyed. But you see for preventative care, it is the second highest ranked country in the world. And you see much higher than the global average, including higher than the United States on certain elements, screenings for high blood pressure, cancer, diabetes, and STDs, meaning that these are women who reported having these life-saving screenings in the last 12 months, putting South Africa at the second highest in the world. However, look at basic needs and we get to 84th in the world. So we're seeing that in South Africa in 2020, 63% of women had periods where they were not able to afford food and were not able to afford adequate shelter. Clearly that is, staggering numbers. And then when you look at opinions of health and safety, while South Africa has high, approval relatively for the quality of their pregnancy care and the overall quality of healthcare in the country, only 35% of women feel safe walking at night. So I think you look at this and you say, are women truly healthy when they're getting these preventative screenings at much higher rates than other countries? But very few relatively feel just safe in their community walking at night. And what are the drivers of that? And what does that say about a society and sort of which factors matter more when we think about flourishing? So we know that, South Africa has been widely reported in the press and through their own crime statistics of having an epidemic of violence against women, even at the same time that their constitution is one of the most progressive in the world, women in all levels of leadership, including, the judiciary, politically, but it's this dichotomy of having strong provisions to support women in leadership and in the economy, but having just routine endemic and epidemic levels of violence against women. Another dichotomy, of course, is in the provision of healthcare in South Africa. I mean, you have a robust private healthcare system in South Africa that's amongst the best in the world, but you see that the majority of the population does not have access to it, but it spills over into why those preventative screening levels are so high, even for women who can't afford private healthcare coverage. They're able through private-public partnerships to have the public sector contract out to them and bring it to women. But I think from a flourishing perspective, you have to say that even if the services are there, does the fact of profound income inequality, gaps in between who has healthcare coverage privately that's amongst the best in the world and who doesn't, even if those services exist for women, do those inequalities and those gaps contribute to more negative flourishing than a country that would have maybe less robust services, but less inequality? I don't think we know the answer to that, but I think it's going to be important questions for the future. So I know we're way over time. So with that, I am going to stop, but I encourage you to check out the microsite and really explore the data. And the 2021 data should be released in September. So you'll be able to see how things have changed over the last year.
Alana, thank you so much for this presentation and these helpful resources. We will also be sending them after the event. But just want to highlight, really appreciate your focus on going beyond having greater spending per capita on healthcare, right? For example, in the United States, but really looking at quality and looking at the different levers such as access, inequality, what kind of cultures are we living in? What kind of cultures are in our organization? How does that impact our ability or desire to access care? And a conversation on human flourishing would not be complete without including a portion on how we empower women. And just seeing that still women's safety and violence is still a basic concern to address in the context of human flourishing. Thank you so much for highlighting some of those paradoxes. I have a question for you in terms of addressing some of these inequalities, and thank you for staying over. We really appreciate your time. So when you see this paradox. What advice would you give women or leaders in organizations, both women and men, to really make that space for health, both we know in the culture, but when it comes to accessing care, making time and space for one's health and their own well-being, because oftentimes those conversations are very separate and not everybody feels like they can bring up their personal health in the workplace, even though we know that toxic workplaces, for example, impact women's health significantly, as do microaggressions in the workplace, et cetera. So what are some tips that you have for leaders? And then finally, I would ask, how do you make the time and space in your own life and leadership to focus on your health? And what are some of those important factors for you personally?
Yeah, those are really great questions. I would say that, for your first question, I think that we probably have to differentiate a little bit between developing countries and developed countries and look at sort of like the overall percent of workers in formal employment. And one of the things that I've seen in South Africa is there's actually been really robust workplace well-being initiatives, healthcare provision in the workplace. For instance, in South Africa, in the earlier days, the groups that were at the forefront of really addressing HIV at a time where there was so much stigma, and the government, you could argue under Thabo Mbeki, had really abandoned its responsibility to take this seriously. It was workplaces who were doing testing, doing treatment, particularly in the mining and extractive industries. But the caveat was sometimes there can be so much attention on these workplace programs, but the majority of the population is not formally employed. So I think leaders can sort of like look at, okay, here's the mobile vans coming in, and here's the yoga that we're doing for lunch, and here are the peer counselors, and you feel really good about it, like you're checking that box. But the reality is, while it's hugely valuable, it's still causing more and more of a divide between those who are formally employed and those who are not formally employed. And so that's not really an answer, but I sometimes, at least in my experience in Africa, is almost you see the opposite. So much attention to the workplace programs and not enough attention to what are techniques that could work for those who are not formally employed. And I think that that's an important component. And the techniques are different, right? So what's going to work in the workplace is not going to be the same kind of technique. In Nigeria, for instance, something that we saw that was really impactful was getting at the heart of, this was for vaccination for polio in northern Nigeria. There's still an issue with uptake for childhood vaccination for polio. And unfortunately with COVID, childhood vaccinations for these like long-standing diseases that can be prevented have gotten even lower uptake as people got more and more focused on COVID. But what we saw was, religious leaders in a community becoming champions of the vaccination program was far more impactful than, like setting up mobile vans and just having a nurse or a healthcare worker that no one knew going door to door, which is something that traditionally had happened. So I think that the Global Flourishing study, as we understand these different levers in different countries, that are trusted, that contribute to flourishing, I think it's going to give us tools also in the public health space so that we can deploy, for religious people, those religious leaders that are trusted and contributing to flourishing potentially could become ambassadors for critical health issues.
Thank you so much, Alana. I think you're really encouraging us to live and expand our thinking, to look at the systems and to really expand the duty of care beyond, well, first fiduciary duty, but then employee well-being, our organizations, our teams, our communities, and then beyond the organization, recognizing our interdependence and how we impact our communities. So empowering the leaders in those communities, whether they're in our organizations or outside of them, and recognizing how interdependent we are and we impact each other at scale. For example, we know polio in one part of the world and contagious diseases are going to impact the rest of us, right, with globalization. So how can we expand our lens of impact to really embody greater care? So thank you for stretching our thinking there. And then final question, how do you embody these principles in your own life?
Now, that's a great question. I think one of the ways that I try to is to avoid sort of overgeneralizing about the human condition, professionally, personally. I've always been drawn to working cross-culturally and working on global projects and thinking about issues. And, when you look at that Africa data, right, you see like a country like Zambia looking so different than a country like Nigeria. And we all know that so many people just sort of overgeneralize and say, okay, this is the issues with healthcare in Africa, or these are the drivers of flourishing in Africa. But obviously the real story is country by country, and sometimes even geographies within a country look really different. And so one of the things that I personally try to do is, think about what are the common elements of humanity that tie us all together, but when is it appropriate and when should we really individualize? So I try to do that personally, and then I'm really excited about, from the research side, that same phenomenon of looking at, what ties us, but what is truly quite different.
Thank you. So you're embodying it in your open-mindedness, trying to clear those biases, trying to see people for individuals as they are. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights and wisdom and your work transforming women's health and flourishing around the world. Thank you so much, Alana.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank everyone who's still with us and everyone who's tuned in today. If you're watching the recording, we appreciate you being with us, and we appreciate all the tremendous insights, work, research, policy, and practice that our speakers have shared with us today, as well as the questions that came in through the chat, your presence. And we invite you to let this be a continued space for dialogue. So in your communities, in your organizations, in your leadership, in your families, and to join us as we dialogue with different leaders, stakeholders. In our next, in the dialogue series, we'll be highlighting people in our Flourishing Network, so different voices from policy and practice. And we are so grateful to be building this flourishing community in the spirit of friendship, pursuing truth collectively. So with that, I want to thank Matt one more time for creating the space for us to gather, and for all of you for your attention today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Matt, any closing words?
Well, just thank you, Noémie, and our Flourishing Network seeks to create a gift economy. There are different kinds of economies, and we try to give each other this gift of friendship and this gift of pursuing truth in its deepest forms. And so thank you for sharing this gift today, and for all of the speakers who joined us and everyone else who participated. And I know that many more will find the video once it's released as well. So it's a great gift to me and to the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And one last question for you. How are you embodying flourishing on a daily basis? I know you recently moved.
Yes. Well, I think some of the speakers have already pointed to the importance of communities of various types providing us with support. And so I'm fortunate to have many individuals and communities who help me seek flourishing in my own life. So pursuing truth in the company of friends is itself a form of flourishing. So thank you for contributing to that, and everyone within the Flourishing Network who also helps with that as well. It's all flourishing is mutual, I guess.
Yes, I love that. Flourishing as a property, not just as individuals, but in the community, and in the space of those relationships. So in the spirit of this series, communication and dialogue is the relationship, and it is a space where we can cultivate flourishing. So thank you for co-creating that space with us today. And we will be in touch with more resources and information for the next events in our series. Again, we hope you have a wonderful regenerative day and be well.